Hey y'all, hope you're doing well today. So, in today's message, we're going to be touching on a few different stories that have been preserved throughout the ages so that we don't forget a lesson, right? But oftentimes, what we end up taking away is just simply the surface level story. And totally not taking the time to dig in deep and to extract the lesson hidden within. So hopefully I can offer just a little bit of insight as far as the lesson and at least my spin on it. And I hope that you just enjoy the message. And most of all, I hope that I get the wheels turning for you. So, y'all, it was hard not to say good morning. It's well past morning, but I'm still taking in my coffee. Look at these little drink caps I found. Aren't they cool? They're just like these silicone little cup covers I found, I think, on Amazon, where I get most things. But pretty cool, especially if you have kids. And, a lot of times you buy these little cups like this and then like the lids go missing or they get cracked or whatever. So if you like to be outdoors like I do a lot too, kind of good to keep your drinks covered. So yeah, thought that was cool. But so I'm going to be enjoying my coffee. I hope you have something good to sit with and to enjoy yourself, some kind of drink or snacks or something. And again, I just really hope you enjoy the message. So today is going to be about stories of realization and, more importantly, reclamation. Okay. Now, let me just open by sharing a little bit about the mindset of a child, right? So, kids are largely driven, I would say, by imagination, right? And we think it's cute, but we kind of leave it there. We don't really, when they come to us with all these fantastical, creative thoughts they have that they swear are real, like I just saw this, this monster, this mermaid. Like when I was, I don't know, maybe 6 or so, I went to the beach. It was the first time that I can remember anyway, going to the beach with my parents. And I remember sitting down at the edge of the water. And I don't really remember anything else. I remember there was not a lot of people there on the beach. It was just one couple, this older couple, like retirees or something, just kind of up away from the water, sitting down, and me and my parents. But at the time, in that moment, see, what I remember of that moment was just all-consuming, and it's something I'll never forget because it was so impactful. But I just remember sitting there at the water's edge and this wave just coming up over my head and going over me, right? And the next thing I knew, sorry y'all, I have a neighbor's cat that jumped up on my window outside, kind of scared me. just looking at me. Yeah. But anyway, it just came up over my head, and I don't remember anything more except that I was totally convinced that I had seen a mermaid. It just happened. Now, I couldn't describe it to you, but it was just something that in that moment, I was so absorbed in that moment, in my mind and in my heart, it absolutely happened. And I stuck to that story for many years. And it's just beautiful, that the mind of a child, that they live in this state of total surrender and total faith in their beliefs, right? It's like they're so attached to the numinous realm. There doesn't seem to be any separation or division, right? Or differentiation, however you want to label it. But it's like there's just there's no separation there. And so when I taught art in the public school system, I taught elementary art, and it was great. It was a lot of fun because I got several years of experience, before I had my own child, just working with kids in that manner, and getting to just be a part of those beautiful years where their imaginations were not restricted, you know. And so that's gonna be a big part of our message today, okay? And I just want to remind you that, the Bible says that we are, supposed to become as little children once again to enter the kingdom of heaven, right? So, yes. So, this morning I woke up. I think I had some dreams. I didn't remember them for some reason. But as I was waking up, you ever have like something just come to mind? It's not like you really hear a voice or anything, but you just have this message that surfaces when you're coming out of your dream state. You're like in this in-between realm, consciously. And sometimes that's where a message is revealed to you. I have that happen sometimes. And so this morning, the message that came to me was, when the bind releases, there'll be more forevermore. And I was like, ooh, that sounds kind of significant, so I'm going to remember that. So I looked up the definition of the word bind in the online etymology dictionary, and it says a tight or awkward situation, right? Because it was like when the bind releases. So I was thinking like bind is a noun, something that releases within your life. So for the noun, it was a tight or awkward situation. And then the verb of bind means to put in bonds. To put in bonds. So it's regarding a restraining or uniting force, right? So to be bound can be a good or a bad thing, right? If you're restrained, it kind of has that energy of like negativity, like a bad thing to be restrained or confined. But it also can mean a uniting force, to be bound, from your own, I think the word is volition, your own free will. You want to be bound to someone or to something, right? That would be a uniting force, which would be, associated with good energy, right? All good intentions and just energy, I guess. So, so essentially, it means an agreement, right? Or a covenant. Also, a binding or uniting power or influence. This is important, especially when we think of the words like agreement or covenant, and then this binding or uniting power or influence. Now we're kind of getting into that spiritual realm, like through the lens of examining, these stories and the multi-layered meanings that are cloaked within in metaphor, right? You have all these different forces at play, these oppositional forces at play in these fairy tales and myths. And I truly believe that it's no coincidence that these stories have parallel themes. It's comparative. When you look at mythology, you can literally draw parallels between the different stories and understand that there has to be intention with preserving particular messages and lessons within these stories. That's my belief anyway. So, yes, and the characters often are in a bind. What you call, being in a bind, in a really tough or bad situation, a tight or awkward situation. And it's, depending on the story, it can be, varying degrees of intensity, And so we can all relate to that, at different seasons in our life, But in these stories, through the lens of bind, meaning agreement or covenant, it's often portrayed as a deal with the devil and being deceived. And this is across the board. So we're going to take a look at some of these examples and just dig a little bit deeper and see what we can make of it, right? So what's also interesting to note, and I think this is something we should just kind of keep in mind throughout the rest of the message today, is that in these fairy tales, usually it's the female character that's being punished, okay? which makes sense if you think about all these characters being personified aspects of, one's own psyche, of each one of us, our own self, our own spirit, our own essence, all these different characters being different aspects of that, right, of oneself. So it seems to be a pattern that the female character in these stories is the one who is punished. And has to do the work or go on the journey. Not always, but in many of these stories. And then the male character, main character in the stories, it makes sense that they are the ones that kind of push the story along. They're kind of like embodying that masculine energy of perseverance, of the warrior archetype. In these stories. So there's this aspect of us that wants to live, that wants to persevere and push through, these tight or awkward situations or troubling or these seasons in our life that test us to the core or whatever it is. There's this spirit inside of us that is driving us to just keep going and to not give up, right? So that's typically personified by the main male character. And then your female character, again, is typically the one that fell victim to deception or has made a mistake in some regard, or at the very least is the one who has to bear the punishment, right? And so keep in mind that the symbolism typically of young maidens, because normally these leading female characters in these, legends are represented as a young maiden, right? And what would that represent with regards to ourselves? I would say innocence, our innocence, that childlike, uninitiated part of us, that has not yet come face to face with evil. Just the part of us that, operates in blind faith. Okay. So next we're going to take a look at examples of testing, you might call, right, in our life's journey represented in these stories. So I don't even know how I come across this name, but I looked it up, and there's this whole story with regards to Greek mythology of Orpheus, right? And I was like, that's interesting, because I think one of the main characters in The Matrix was Morpheus with an M. But so Orpheus, and I may not even be pronouncing this right, but he's a big figure in Greek mythology, and he married Eurydice, right? And that's Eurydice. And so he married Eurydice, and she, without going into all the details, right? Because these stories sometimes are just extremely elaborate and expansive and all this stuff. But just touching on the main details, because we're gonna highlight several different stories, and then you can hopefully be inspired to take this on yourself and do further research. But his wife, Orpheus's wife, Eurydice, got bit by a viper. Okay, and it killed her, and she wound up going to the land of the dead, right, Hades. And then Orpheus is overcome with sadness, and so he's inspired to go and retrieve her. And if I'm not mistaken, I didn't write this down, but I think that a lot of this may or may not play a part here or be important, but a lot of his qualities were that of kind of like a child, very imaginative, very creative. I think he was into music and things like this, right? So, but he's inspired to go to Hades to retrieve Eurydice, all right? So what happens is he finds her, and I believe he convinces the god of the underworld in Hades to let him take Eurydice back up to the land of the living, and I think he was able to convince him to do that by playing some kind of, or singing some kind of beautiful song, right? And so whatever the agreement was, or however it worked out, he was like, yeah, that's fine, but there's one condition. In order to successfully retrieve and save Eurydice and get out of Hades, you can't look back at her. So as Orpheus is climbing up out of Hades and his wife is close behind him, right? He just wanted to turn and look at her, okay? And what happens when he does that? She disappears. So he broke that agreement, right? And we're going to look at the symbolism here. But, I'm reminded of the story in the Bible, of Lot and his wife, and she was punished by looking back as well. So there's some significance here in these stories of looking back. So let's take a look at this one story of Orpheus, right? So the meaning of the name Orpheus is orphan. Orphan. And then we have Eurydice, meaning, I'm going to give you my definition based on what I've read. I would say certainty or assuredness, right? And we'll look a little bit deeper into that name later. And then we have viper, from Latin, vipera, meaning snake or serpent. And then it says that vipera, which is the Latin word, is a contraction of vivipara, from vivus, meaning alive or living. And then you have the Proto-Indo-European root word gwei, Gwei, meaning to live, right? Now the second part of this word, right? So you have vive, thinking of to revive or viva, right? So vive is the part of the word of viper that means alive or living or to live. The second part is from parire, I guess, Parire. I have no idea how to say these words. But hopefully you can do your own research from there. But the second part of that word essentially means to bring forth or to bear. So viper, remember to reverse when you're looking at the parts and pieces of words, especially when it's coming from Latin or some old language. A lot of times when you're breaking the first part and the second part apart and you're examining those, you want to flip-flop, what comes first here. So viper, who would have ever thought that it could mean to bring forth life, right? To bring forth life. And I'm reminded of the Evanescence song, Bring Me Back to Life. And so, again, we see the hero's journey, like this formula or this pattern, this cycle of life, death, and then life again. So it's about new life, right? A new life. It's about rebirth. So let's look a little bit deeper. So Hades, in all these myths, is the underworld, essentially. It's the realm or the abode of the dead, okay? Let's take a look. Let's read a little bit here about Hades and what it really means. And again, this is still from the online etymology dictionary. So it says, Hades is also the name of the god of the dead in Greek mythology, right? And the name of his realm, the abode of the dead spirits from the 1590s. From Greek, Hades, Haides, in Homer, the name of the god of the underworld, son of Kronos and Rhea, brother of Zeus and Poseidon. His name is of unknown origin, perhaps literally the invisible. Okay? So here we have, they go on to explain from a prefix, A-I-D-E-I-N, meaning to see, to see. So if you reverse this, you find that there's a reversal, right? Now it means to see the invisible. Okay, it says the name of the god was extended in later Greek writing to his kingdom, also the grave or death. So it's like death granting us the ability to see the invisible. The process of gaining the eyes to see. The process of transforming our physical eyes to spiritual eyes. Right, to see the invisible. Hades, to see the invisible. So now, if we take these pieces of this puzzle and we put them together and we see how the parts, interact and work together to form the story, there's meaning there. There's a deeper meaning that we can relate to that resonates with us, And that's good because that can bring comfort, especially after, times in our life that are full of strife and confusion and just hard times, right? So the viper, in the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, the viper brought physical death into the story, but remembering that legends are often metaphorical and sometimes paradoxical. Sometimes they're multi-layered. It doesn't have to all be symbolic of the spiritual. Sometimes it can mean, something playing out with regards to our actual physical reality in the earth, and the planets. Sometimes it's multi-layered. It's like truth again at all levels. So we know that vipers, typically, snakes, serpents, they in these stories represent a death of some kind, right? So the Bible speaks of dying to the flesh. And so let me share a quote from Eckhart Tolle, who said, "The secret of life is to die before you die and find that there is no death." Okay, so let's take a look at Lot's wife, right? Because I was reminded too, because there was this looking back, which was forbidden, but she did it. And so she essentially became invisible, right? She disintegrated, she dissolved at that point. So in both of these stories, what each character or pair of characters, what they were not meant to look back upon, it's like what are they instructed not to look back at or on? It's death and destruction. Okay? So bringing this into our life now, symbolically speaking, we can understand that, the message may be that we have to be willing and strong enough to walk away sometimes, from specifically an environment or an atmosphere of death and or destruction. Energetically, spiritually, emotionally. Sometimes this is, labeled breaking soul ties or, breaking trauma bonds. So again, Eurydice, meaning assuredness. That's kind of the the summary of what I defined it as. But in looking it up, actually, it means wide justice. Wide justice, or to show or pronounce solemnly, right? Like there's this essence of certainty with regards to the meaning of her name. So relating this to the story, it's like our certainty, right? Or you might relate that to, our old beliefs, which we call or label wisdom, right? Or mental strongholds, right? That we were operating from, mistakenly identifying these mental strongholds, these beliefs, as wisdom. Those are the things that had to die once we understand what her character represents here. Okay? These agreements, these old agreements, your old way of life, your old mental strongholds and paradigms, whatever it is, those had to die. And I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18, which is, I believe that's the one that says, let whoever, is pursuing wisdom or, wants to be wise, become a fool, so that they may become wise. So there has to be this reversal first. See? So remember that viper means to bring to life. Yet it was the viper, both in this story and in the Garden of Eden, that first brought death, right? And it brought death in the Garden of Eden via what? Deception. Again, think about it. if we're operating from certainty, our own Eurydice, our own personal collection of nuggets of wisdom that we think that constitutes our knowledge, and if we're operating from that, and we don't have the whole picture, we don't see everything because we can't, literally, because we're not God, because we are limited from our human viewpoint, then it's like a way for deception to work in our lives. But it's working in our lives in a way that we don't know. We're unaware of it. We are that young maiden. We are naive and innocent. And because we're unaware, see, we're not held responsible. Because we're unaware. Right? We haven't reached that age of accountability. That's my understanding, at least. Right? So, yeah. All right. So it was deception that brought death. Okay. And this death had to happen in order for there to be life. Okay. Death of, I would say, deception. Death of not knowing. Death of only part of the whole. Death of, this small fraction of what we have access to know consciously, and yet being strong enough to be humble enough to say, I know that I'll never know it all. It's going to play a part as we move forward. So to me, that's a key piece of the puzzle. So when retrieving or moving forward with, once we go to Hades and we retrieve Eurydice and we're trying to come back up to the land of the living, right? And she's representing reclaimed wisdom, right? It's like when retrieving or moving forward with a reclaimed wisdom, that is what it is because of having died and gone to the underworld. The catch is not to look back, or else this wisdom disappears or dissolves or goes away. So, in remembering the message that came to me this morning, which was, when the bind releases, there'll be more forevermore. And remember, bind can mean an agreement or covenant, right? Okay. Which is very closely in alignment with Eurydice, which is like this pronunciation. There's this certainty, this agreement, this mental bind, I would say. All right, so I was reminded of Romeo and Juliet, too. Think about it. Because Juliet's potion made her seem dead, but she came back to life. So there was like this temporary visitation to the land of the dead, all right, symbolically. But then there was this awakening, right? But there was a punishment implemented on Romeo because, right, his action of looking upon her, while not yet fully reclaimed, because she had not woken up yet. He was looking upon her before she had come back to, a waking state. Then his act of looking upon her, just like Orpheus, looking back at Eurydice, right, before they had escaped Hades, because when he looked back at Eurydice, they were still in the process of trying to come out of Hades. Okay? The instruction was to not look back. So Juliet was still in the process of slumber, right? Of seeming death, but it wasn't real and actual death. But Romeo looked upon her, and that caused him to take actions, right, upon himself, in a bad way. And I'm sure you know the story. So, yes. So it resulted in his real death, Romeo, right? So remember, these characters are, again, personified aspects of ourself. So what's the message? What's the lesson? I'm going to propose my thoughts to you as they kind of came together for me. Maybe the lesson is not to look upon your old life, your old ways, your old wisdom, right? Maybe it means don't doubt yourself, especially while you're still coming out of Hades. And if we remember the definition of Hades, it meant to see the invisible. Well, to see the invisible sounds like faith to me. It's almost like faith comes about while in Hades. That's where we retrieve faith while in the underworld, right? The ability to see the invisible. Okay, but if we go back to looking at what we used to look at before we had the gift of faith, the ability to see the invisible, if we go back to, again, our old ways, our old wisdom, right? Then there's consequence. So, okay, what if we don't fully come out of Hades or a place of faith until the invisible becomes visible, which would mean the afterlife, right? So maybe we shouldn't doubt what we've been shown or taught, okay, by reverting to our old ways of thinking. Or maybe we can recover our own Eurydice, right, or solemn pronunciation, but just not look to her to guide us, right? Because all these male characters, the other part of the pair, they were fine until they looked back. So maybe they shouldn't have retrieved their Eurydice at all. Maybe leaving Eurydice in Hades is like leaving our solemn pronunciation or proclamation or assuredness or certainty, leaving it in faith. Leaving Eurydice in Hades may symbolically be equated to leaving our certainty in faith, right? In the place that means to see the invisible. Maybe once we put off the old man, we shouldn't go looking for it, right? Because it's kind of like trying to, they're struggling to bring this part of themselves that essentially has died with them. It's like trying to drag a dead carcass. It's like bearing their cross, see, which we have to do until the invisible is visible, essentially, right? So, yes, to know what you know, to have to live with the pain of old experiences, and yet to not look upon this as guidance. Right? That's what I come to. Our wisdom is resurrected only in the realm of faith, seeing the unseen. Right? Both Eurydice and Lot's wife became invisible when looked upon. Okay? So faith essentially becomes our wisdom. It kind of replaces that worldly wisdom, that dependence on self, that certainty in self. It's replaced by faith, okay, a surrender to, the higher power, essentially. So what this means for us is this. Faith becomes our wisdom. And furthermore, and I would say a key point here is that faith without works is dead. So there's a part that we play still, okay? Our actions are determined by our beliefs. Our actions are determined by what we're choosing to look upon, right? That's what drives us. We have to be so careful with that because our actions are what make us co-creators in manifesting this life experience. So it's kind of like, who do we really have to blame here? So now, right, after going through this experience and these stories that are full of metaphor, now the goal is to live from faith, right? So I want to read a verse in the Bible with you all. And it's Mark chapter 11, verse 23. And it says, "For verily I say unto you, that whosoever shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith." So what if we are bound or restricted or constricted because we are acting from our Eurydice instead of faith that we had to go to Hades to receive? See? So, to me, keeping this in mind and operating from this position in our mind and heart is how we reclaim our true position of power. So I hope you enjoyed the message. I hope that it got the wheels turning for you. Thank you so much for coming along to hear it, and I hope that you have a beautiful day. And I'll see you again very soon.